Good evening everyone. Welcome to another live streaming po ng ating basic transfer pricing. And tonight, continuation po tayo or part 2 ng case of Asat Inc. versus Commissioner of Internal Revenue. No? May viewers na ba tayo, Hari? Sige, shout out muna.
Shoutout po kay Ma'am Lilian Yao. Good evening po.
Okay, good evening po.
Siya pa lang, ma'am. Yung viewers, ma'am, 5 viewers.
Okay. So, sino ba tong si Asat, no? Si Asat Inc., no? Versus Commissioner of Internal Revenue. Subsidiary siya ng may parent company siya na wholly owned domestic subsidiary siya. And then nasaan yung kanyang mga parent company, yung iba na sa Switzerland, no, sa Europe, and ginawa siya na nagbibigay siya ng services, no? Okay. Organized under the laws of California siya, no? Sino yung kanyang immediate na parent company? Si Asat Limited, Hong Kong Corporation. And then meron siyang si Asat Limited, owned naman siya o yung ultimate parent ni Asat Inc., si QPL International Holding Limited, Bermuda Corporation naman, no? Okay. And then itong si Asat Inc., binili naman siya ng Worldtech International Limited, no? Domestic corporation organized in California. And then sa Worldtech naman, binili naman siya ni QPL. So, nagiging indirect subsidiary pa rin niya si Asat Inc., no? So, ganyan ang ginagawa ng mga group of companies, no? Yung structure nila, they complicate the structure, no? At ano yung purpose? To save payment of taxes, no? Ano yung mga issues natin dito? Yung accuracy-related penalty. And what do we mean by accuracy-related penalty? We mean that underpayment, no, of tax required to be shown in the income tax return. It happened if yung taxpayer hindi nag-report ng kanyang income or nag-claim ng deductions, no? In this case, anong nangyari dito sa Asat Inc.? Nag-claim siya ng net operating loss, no? Nag-carry forward siya. Okay. So, yan po yung issue dito. At saka, ginawa siya na purchaser ng kanyang parent company, which is the Asat Limited in Hong Kong, pero hindi siya in-appoint as agent, no? Okay. So, anong opinion dito? No? So, balikan natin para review natin, balikan natin ano ba yung mga issues, no? So, ang issue number 1, whether Section 638A applied to petitioner for its tax year ending April 30, 1991. No? Tingnan natin mamaya ano ba yung Section 6038A. And then whether there was a failure to authorize petitioner as its parent agent under Section 6038A. No? Failure to appoint an agent, pero siya yung doing at least 5 purchases for the parent company every week, no? And then whether respondent's determination under Section 6038A reducing petitioner's cost of goods sold by 1,494,437 was an abuse of discretion. Bakit? Kasi pag nireduce mo yung cost of goods sold mo, what will happen to your income? Reduce din, no? So, bawas din yung income mo. Another is whether respondent's determination under Section 6038 eliminating petitioner's net operating loss carry forward of 165,147 was an abuse of discretion. Bakit abuse of discretion? Kasi dinisallow sila ng IRS, no? Whether petitioner may deduct consulting fees of 280,922. Kasi itong consulting fees dinisallow din ng IRS. Whether petitioner is liable for the accuracy-related penalty under Section 6662 for negligence. Okay. Ano yung accuracy-related penalty? Applies if the taxpayer underpay the tax required to be shown in the return. No? And it may happen if there is understatement of income or overclaim deductions. No? So, dalawa yan. Pag nag-overclaim ka ng deductions mo, bababa yung income tax mo. Pag overclaim ka naman ng under declaration ka naman ng income, bababa din yung income tax mo. No? Okay. Okay. So let's now go to the opinion of the court, no? Ano yung opinion of the court with all those issues na nangyari? Ano yung opinion of the court, no? So sa yung una-una, whether section 6038A applies to the petitioner, no? Ano yung 6038A? Ito yung nag-define ng reporting corporation as a domestic corporation that is 25% foreign owned. No? So, 25% foreign owned siya, related party pa rin siya, at considered controlled pa rin siya. No? There is a significant influence. Meaning, ownership by one foreign person of either 25% of the voting stock or 25% of the value of all classes of the domestic corporation stock. No, 25%. A foreign person is any person who is not a United States person under Section 7701A, including corporation. Petitioner stipulated that it always has been a corporation, and from December 22, 1988 to June 30, 1992, that it was wholly owned by a foreign corporation, Asat Limited. Itong Asat Limited, ito yung based in Hong Kong. Consequently, petitioner in a reporting corporation for its year ending April 30, 1991, the taxable year covered by the notice of deficiency. Okay. So, yun po yung 6038A, no? And then, information with respect to certain foreign-owned corporation. No? So, there is a requirement doon sa 6038A. If any time during the taxable year, the corporation hereinafter in this section referred to as the reporting corporation is a domestic corporation and is 25% foreign-owned. Yan ang sabi ng 6038A. Such corporation shall furnish at such time and in such manner as the Secretary shall by regulations prescribe the information described in subsection B, and such corporation shall maintain such records as may be appropriate to determine the correct treatment of transactions with related parties as the Secretary shall be by regulations prescribed. No? So, ganun ang 6038A. For purposes of this section, 25% foreign-owned. A corporation is 25% foreign-owned if at least 25% of the total voting power of all classes of stock of such corporation entitled to vote, or B, the total value of all classes of stock of such corporation. Okay. Is owned at any time during the taxable year by one foreign person, hereinafter in this section referred to as 25% foreign shareholder. Hence, record keeping, reporting, and authorization of agent. Ayan. Kasi nag-agent siya pero hindi authorized. Hence, record keeping, reporting, and authorization of agent requirements under Section 6038A apply to reporting corporations who have transactions with related parties. Ang mangyayari niyan, kagaya yan dito sa atin sa Pilipinas, yung Bear Form 1709. No? Mag-a-attach tayo sa ating ITR. Okay, so reporting corporation. Section 38A C1 defines reporting corporation as a domestic corporation that is 25% foreign owned. Meaning, ownership by one foreign person of either 25% of the voting stock of 25% of the value of all classes of the domestic corporation stock. A foreign person is any person who is not a United States person under Section 7701A. No? Nabasa ko na to sa inyo kanina. So, hindi siya United States person. So, consider siya as foreign person. Okay. So, in this case, si Asat Inc., no? Yung sa California, is owned by a foreign corporation, Asat Limited. No? Consequently, Petitioner is a reporting corporation for its year ending April 30, 1991, the taxable year covered by the notice of deficiency. No? So, reporting corporation siya. So, dapat nagre-report siya sa parent niya, parent company. So, related party. Section 6038 EC 2A define a related party to include any 25% foreign shareholder of the reporting corporation. So, pasok talaga si Asat Inc. sa related party. No? So, Asat Limited owned 100% of Petitioner at all times during the year in issue. Thus, Asat Limited is a related party to Petitioner for its taxable year ending April 30, 1991. So, related party si Asat Limited, no? At saka si Asat Inc. Transaction, Section 1.6038A Thus, 2A 2 Income Tax Regulations provides a definition of transaction in the context of triggering Form 5472 filing requirements. No? A reportable transaction is any transactions of the types listed in paragraph B3 and 4 of this section. Section 1.6038A 2B3 Income Tax Regulations provides in part foreign related party transactions kasama for which only monetary consideration is paid or received by reporting corporation. If the related party is a foreign person, the reporting corporation must set forth on Form 5472 the dollar amounts of all reportable transactions for which monetary considerations was the sole consideration paid or received during the taxable year of the reporting corporation. The types of transactions described in this paragraph are letter B, consideration paid and received for technical, managerial, engineering, construction, scientific, or other services. Okay. X. Other amounts paid or received not specifically identified in this paragraph B3 to the extent that such amounts are taken into account for the determination and computation of the taxable income of the reporting corporation. Excuse me. The above provisions defining a transaction are very broad, so indeed, petitioner does not dispute, and we hold that it engaged its transactions with a related party for its taxable year ending April 30, 1991. When it contracted with and paid for assembly services by Asat Limited, petitioner nevertheless maintains the Section 6038A is inapplicable for the reasons set forth below. Before those reasons are examined, however, a review of the statute's background is in order to provide context to an analysis of the statute and the parties' arguments. Ano naman tong Section 6038A? No? So, Section 6038A, originally enacted in 1982, imposed reporting requirements on foreign-controlled U.S. corporations and branches of foreign corporation. So, the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1989 added record maintenance requirements that are broadened by the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1990. To affect all open years, the IRS issued final implementing regulations on June 19, 1991. Section 6038A was drafted to aid the IRS in enforcement of Section 482. Its sponsors in the House of Representatives describe it as an effort to improve the enforceability of Section 482. The IRS had experienced difficulties obtaining information from foreign parents of U.S. corporation. So the non-compliance penalty of Section 6038E3 is among the principal enforcement mechanism of the statute. Okay. So yung non-compliance penalty. Okay. Applicable rule in cases of non-compliance, no? Kasi hindi nag-comply. If the rules of this paragraph apply to any transactions, A, the amount of the deduction allowed under subtitle A for any amount paid or incurred by the reporting corporation to the related party in connection with such transaction. And B, the cost to the reporting corporation of any property acquired in such transaction from the related party for transferred by such corporation in such transaction to the related party, no? Shall be the amount determined by the secretary of the in the secretary's sole discretion from the secretary's own knowledge or from such information as the secretary may obtain through testimony or otherwise. Contention of the parties. Petitioner contends that Section 6038A does not apply, no? So, sabi ng IRS 6038A applies. Sabi naman ng Asat hindi raw, no? So, petitioner contends that Section 6038A does not apply because it was not at 25% owned by a foreign corporations when respondent requested the authorization of agent on November 25, 1992. Petitioner further contends that WorldTech, a domestic corporation, became a successor in interest to Asat Limited when WorldTech on July 15, 1992 purchased newly issued stock from Petitioner and became its 95% shareholder. Under Section 16038A 5A, income tax regulations, a successor in interest to a related party must execute the authorization of agent. Yun ang requirement, ha? Execute authorization of agent as described in paragraph B of this section. Petitioner finally contend that Section 6038A is not operative. No? So, di sila naniniwala sa 6038A. It's not operative because it was a legal impossibility for petitioner to obtain the authorization of agent. Okay. So, impossible daw na kukuha ng authorization ng agent. Petitioner argues that since it exercised considerable effort to obtain the authorization of agent from Asat Limited with no success, and since it did not have the power to compel Asat Limited to grant authorization of agent, then it should not be penalized under Section 6038 E3. So, yun ang kanilang contention, no? Hindi raw punishable under Section 6038E. Okay. Respondent argues that Section 6038E is applicable to petitioner, as it is undisputed that petitioner was a reporting corporation during the year ending April 30, 1991. According to respondent, the status of a corporation as a reporting corporation for a particular year is unaffected by subsequent events. Respondent correctly points out that neither Section 6038A, the regulations thereunder, nor the legislative history contain any provision permitting a reporting corporation to avoid the requirements and penalties of that section for a particular year because of a subsequent change in stock ownership. No, nagkaroon ng change in stock ownership. It is equally true, however, that Section 6038A, the regulations thereunder, and the legislative history make no mention of the issue whatsoever. No? So the issue is not whether petitioner was a reporting corporation for the year in issue, but whether Section 6038E3 applies for the year in issue. No? An issue of first impression. So, pinagtatalunan nila, no? Kung mag-apply ba yung 6038A. So, discussion. We begin our analysis with the well-established rule that statutory construction begins with the language of the relevant statute. No? Consumer Production Safety Commission versus GTE Sylvania Inc. No? So, U.S. 102-108, 1980. Statutes are to be read as to give effect to their plain and ordinary meaning, unless to do so would produce absurd or futile results. Where a statute is clear on its face, we require unequivocal evidence of legislative purpose before construing the statute so as to override the plain meaning of the words used therein. May shout out? Okay. Sige. So, we may use legislative history to clarify an ambiguity statute, no? Under the case of City of New York versus Commissioner. Even where the statutory language appears clear, we may seek out any reliable evidence as to legislative purpose. So the statute applies to a reporting corporation. No? So settled na yun. 6038A. The statute applies to a reporting corporation if at any time during a taxable year it has transactions with related parties. Okay. We have already established that petitioner was a reporting corporation that had transactions with a related party during the year in issue. The phrase, if at any time during a taxable year, relates to the taxable year that the reporting corporation has a transaction with a related party. So Section 6038A1 provides in part, the rules of paragraph 3, the non-compliance penalty, shall apply to any transaction between the reporting corporation and any related party who is a foreign person unless such related party agrees in such manner and at such time as the secretary shall prescribe, no, to authorize the reporting corporation to act as such related party limited agent. Kaya may non-compliance penalty. Again, the relative time period is when the transaction took place. No? This interpretation is consistent with the intent of Congress, as shown by the legislative history. So Congress intended for the IRS to have access to the information necessary to determine if related party transactions complied with the Section 482. The relevant time period for establishing a taxpayer status as a reporting corporation is when the transactions took place. The statute speaks in those terms. Okay. As stated by the Supreme Court in Commissioner versus Ingley, our duty then is to fix that interpretation which can most fairly be said to be embedded in the statute in the sense of being most harmonious with its scheme and with the general purposes that Congress manifested. Okay. Petitioner would have us read into Section 6038AE the additional requirements that petitioner be a reporting corporation at the time the request for authorization of agent is made upon it. If the statute could be rendered inapplicable by subsequent ownership changes in a reporting corporation, then it might lose a substantial part of its efficiency for its stated purposes. A subsequent change of ownership in the reporting corporation after the taxable year containing the transaction in question does not insulate petitioner from the application of Section 6038A. Okay, so petitioner further contends that Section 6038A is not operative because it was a legal impossibility for petitioner to obtain the authorization of agent. More accurately stated, petitioner contends that it was not able to compel its one-time parent to provide the authorization of agent, no? So hindi siya daw nakakuha ng authorization ng agent. A subsidiary is generally not in the position to compel its parents to perform any act. Such is the nature of parent-subsidiary relationship. The legislative history to Section 6038A discusses the situation where a related party, which is not known to be such by the reporting corporation at the time the two conduct a transaction, refuses to authorize the reporting corporation to act as its agent. No? In that situation, the reporting corporation would generally be subject to the disallowance rule. No? Okay. Penalty. With respect to transactions with the related party taking place prior to the time the reporting corporation became aware, no, that Section 6038A would apply. Okay. Although this result could be called harsh, the House report anticipated that no exception would be made unless, among other conditions, the reporting corporation did not know or have reason to know that it was conducting transactions with a related party. Okay, so there is no evidence and petitioner does not argue that it did not know that it was engaged in transaction with its sole shareholder during petitioner's 1991 tax year. We reject petitioner's argument that Section 6038A should not apply because petitioner allegedly was unable to compel its one-time sole shareholder to authorize petitioner as its agent for purposes of Section 6038A. We deal next with petitioner's successor in interest argument. The term successor in interest is not defined in Section 6038A or its regulation. Petitioner argues that Voltec, a domestic corporation, is a successor in interest to Asat Limited, since Voltec replaced Asat Limited as majority shareholder in petitioner. Okay. Shout out. Sige.
Shoutout po kay Ina Official from Pangasinan.
Okay.
Kay Sir Jun Sarmiento. Kay
Okay.
Ma'am Esperanza Salom. Kay Ma'am Rosalina Tune from Cebu City.
Okay.
Shoutout din po kay Razel Galiema.
Okay.
Kay Ma'am Ira Saludo.
Okay.
Kay Rose Ann Bernabe. Kay Ras Painter. Pati po kay Sir Ryan Deocades.
Okay.
Opo, kay And kay Ma'am Joanne Vergara from Pangasinan. May
Okay.
tanong po ma'am si Sir Ryan
Sige.
Leocades. Pag ang corporation ba nag-establish ng another corporation, pero hindi subsidiary, pero yung mga incorporators are the same, is there a related party of the two
Yes.
different corporations?
Yes po, yes. Kahit po different corporation yan, related party sila. Why? Ano sabi sa related party? Same person ang officers or stockholders, so they're related as related party. Controlled by same persons. So they're related parties. Okay? Meron pa? So considered po sila. Try to look at the definition of related party, no? Sa accounting standard natin. So ano yung related party? Pagka the same person controls the corporation, whether directly or indirectly. So they are related parties. Okay. So Asat Limited did not sell its stock in Petitioner to Worldtech. Rather, after the year in issue, Petitioner issued stock to Worldtech, which diluted the interest of Asat Limited. No? So in Petitioner from 100% to 5%. No? Respondent correctly points out that one of the purpose of Section 6038A is to allow the IRS to obtain the records of a foreign related party's transactions with a domestic corporation through the issuance of a summons. Okay. So therefore, successor to interest must be interpreted in that light. For Section 6038A to accomplish its purpose, the IRS must be able to compel production of records from party that has possession of or controls the records of the related parties transaction. So in this case, the records sought are Asat Limited, a foreign related party, not Worldtech, no? Worldtech succeeded to nothing of Asat Limited. So we conclude that Worldtech is not a successor in interest to Asat Inc. or to Asat Limited, as that term is used in Section 16038 5E Income Tax Regulations. No? So in sum, we hold that Section 6038A does apply to petitioner. Okay. So ano daw yung 6038A? Apply to petitioner. So, failure to designate agent issue. So, ito na yung issue na hindi nag-designate, no? The Section 6038A3, non-compliance penalty, it's operative. In this case, if petitioner did not comply with the Section 6038A, E1, which provides enforcement of request for certain records. Okay. Agreement to treat corporation as agent. The rules of paragraph 3 shall apply to any transaction between the reporting corporation and any related party who is a foreign person, unless such related party agrees in such manner and at such time as the secretary shall prescribe. To authorize the reporting corporation to act as such related party's limited agent solely for purposes of applying Section 7602, no? 7603 and 7604 with respect to any request by the secretary to examine records or produce testimony related to any such transactions or with respect to any summons by the secretary for such reports or testimony. The appearance of persons or production of records by reason of the reporting corporation being such an agent shall not subject such persons or records to legal process for any purpose other than determining the correct treatment under this title of any transaction between the reporting corporation and such related party. Okay. So petitioner stipulated that it did not obtain the authorization of Asat Limited to be its agent until after the notice of deficiency was issued. Income tax regulation requires that the authorization be provided to the IRS within 30 days after the IRS request is its petitioner, no? Okay. Abuse of discretion issue. So is there an abuse of discretion? Standard of proof. The standard of review of respondent determination under Section 6038A E3 is liberal, whereas the word discretion does not appear in Section 482 when the non-compliance penalty of Section 6038A applies. No, the amount of the deduction and the cost of any property shall be the amount determined by the Secretary in the Secretary's sole description from the Secretary's own knowledge or from such information as the Secretary may obtain through testimony or otherwise. The Conference Committee report offers guidance to a court reviewing respondents' determination under Section 6038A. Okay. The conference intend that a taxpayer seeking judicial review of the exercise of the Secretary's sole discretion under the non-compliance rule shall bear the burden of proof by clear and convincing evidence that the Secretary's abused that discretion. The conference do not intend to foreclose a court from overturning a determination by the Secretary that was proven by clear and convincing evidence, either to have been made with improper motive or to have been clearly erroneous by reference to all reasonably credible interpretation or assumptions of facts. On the other hand, the conference do not expect a court to overturn a determination unless it could do so even after accepting as true all allegations and inferences that may support the Secretary's position. So yun po yung respondent determination. So the conference committee report also states, under the conference agreement, in cases of non-compliance, the amount of any deduction for any amount paid or incurred to the related party by the reporting corporation on the cost of property transferred between such persons. Okay. Dami nilang mga issues, no? Okay. Okay, next is the petitioner's expert report. No? Petitioner submitted an expert report, the report by Dr. Clark Chandler, which opined that it was an abuse of discretion, abuse daw of discretion, no? For respondent to have determined that petitioner should have received a 15% commission or gross profit spread. Respondent objected to the admission of the report. We allow the report into evidence, subject to respondent's objection. However, we advise the parties that they could address the issue of the report's admissibility on brief. We found the report to be at no help to petitioner's case. Specifically, the report utilized information not in respondent's possession and did not accept as true credible allegations and inference that may support the Secretary's position. However, the report equivocated while purporting to form a conclusion is impossible, no? For me to verify the reasonableness of the IE, International Examiner, no? Conclusions. The role of the expert is to assist the trier of facts, to understand the evidence or to determine a fact in issue. No? So, IRS economist. Ms. Hamilton received advice from the IRS economist Ron McKinley. Mr. Hamilton described to Mr. McKinley petitioner's business and its relationship to its foreign parent. He told her that he had experience in determining the an appropriate commission rate for services and that he was currently examining a company that provided services similar to those provided by petitioner. So Mr. McKinley also told Ms. Hamilton that petitioner should be compensated for its additional function performed on behalf of its foreign parent. Based on his experience, Mr. McKinley told Ms. Hamilton that a 10 to 15% commission range would be appropriate. No? Mana survey. Mr. McKinley also gave Ms. Hamilton research. No? Research bulletin surveyed before by Mana, no? The Mana survey. Okay. Respondent asked for and did not receive information from petitioner regarding its contractual relationship with Asat Limited. Specific pricing policies, cost analysis, projections, budgets, or their negotiations is deciding on the process gross profit spread. Okay. Ms. Hamilton used the above factors to determine a basic gross profit spread of 10% and then added 5%, no, to make it 15% total, to compensate petitioners for the services that rendered to Asat Limited in addition to locating customers. No? Okay, so petitioner's argument. So, okay. Ano naman yung petitioner's argument? No? So, petitioner argues that we may find respondent determination to be clearly erroneous by focusing on either her results or her methodology. Petitioner argues that it should be able to present evidence, expert testimony, to show the correct cost and expenses based on the information available, not to be confused with information in the respondent's position to the respondent. Petitioner states that a commission rate, gross profit spread, of 6% was determined by market conditions and is economically realistic and reasonable. To support its claim, petitioner cites a statement by Mr. Borowski, an officer and employee petitioner, that the industry average for commissions is 5%. No? Petitioner also refers the courts to Dr. Chandler's report in support of petitioner's commission rate. Petitioner argues that the IRS economist was unauthorized IRS personnel, not assigned to the case, and that respondent should have made him available for trial. Petitioner requests that the court draw an adverse inferences from respondents not calling the economist as a witness. No? So petitioner further argues that the international examiner erroneously relied on non-comparable mana surveys. No? So petitioner cites section 482 cases for the propositions that the use of industry averages is not appropriate unless the data is representative of the taxpayer. Petitioner points out that it is not in the manufacturing business and that the MANA survey deals with manufacturers' agents. No? So petitioner also argues that Ms. Hamilton erroneously made an increase to her commission rate beyond her base adjustment. No? So petitioner argues that since the MANA survey cannot be shown to have used comparable companies, it is impossible to know what services are included in the base commission rate. Finally, petitioner argues that Ms. Hamilton's use of the what-if scenario shows that she backed into the 15% gross profit spread. Thereafter, petitioner argues that the determination is an abuse of discretion. No? So, yun na yung issue kanina kung abuse of discretion ba. Okay. Application of law to facts. Okay. Petitioner would like us to perform a section 482 analysis. Such an analysis would not be appropriate. Petitioner, after failing to provide respondent with basic information from absence, okay. So, about its related party transactions, argues that respondent determined an incorrect gross profit spread. No? Petitioners attack on respondents' results that respondents' gross profit spread is not as accurate as petitioners, ignores the purpose of the statute. Okay. Section 6038A was enacted to ensure that the IRS either would have timely access to the information necessary to make a complete analysis of our deductions, no? Okay. Section 6038A was enacted to ensure that the IRS either would have timely access to the information necessary to make complete analysis of cost between related parties or the right to make an adjustment based solely on the information that it did have. Information na meron sila, no? So whether the taxpayer can later justify a cost is irrelevant. No? Accordingly, the amounts established by the Secretary cannot be overturned by a court on the basis that they diverge from actual cost or other amounts incurred, or on the basis that they do not clearly reflect income. The fact that amounts established by the Secretary can be proven to be clearly erroneous by reference to information or materials that were not within the Secretary's knowledge or possession would not alone in the conferee's view be sufficient cause for a court to redetermine allowable amounts of deductions and the cost of goods sold. Petitioner argues that Ms. Hamilton should have accepted Mr. Borowski's opinion that the 6% gross profit spread was determined by market conditions and is economically realistic and reasonable since Mr. Borowski had 20 years of experience in the industry. Suffice it to say that the IRS is not required to accept the assertions of interested parties on faith. In fact, The legislative history also addressed this point. Similarly, the exercise of the Secretary's sole discretion, in determining how much weight, if any, to give to any individual or document or other item of information that has been submitted is subject to the same scope of review. Proof by clear and convincing evidence that the Secretary abused that discretion, no? Abused na Secretary. While accepting a true all allegations and inferences that may support the Secretary's position. Okay, so petitioner's argument that Ms. Hamilton used an unauthorized IRS economist is without merit. No? Yan na yung sabi ng court. The case cited by petitioner does not support its argument, nor will be draw an adverse inference from respondents not calling the IRS economist as a witness. It is not up to respondent to prove that her determination is correct. It is petitioners who has the heavy burden. O, sinong petitioner dito? Si Asat, no? Asat Inc. If a party fails to introduce evidence within the party's possession, we may presume in some circumstances that if produced, the evidence would be unfavorable to that party. Wichita Terminal Elevator Company versus Commissioner. This is true where the party which does not produce the evidence has the burden of proof or the other party has established a prima facie case. Petitioner was the burden of proof and has not made a prima facie showing of the facts which it wishes to establish by adverse inference. Petitioner knew the identity of the IRS economist in ample time to call him as a witness, but failed to do so. Under these circumstances, we shall not draw an adverse inference against respondent. Petitioner argues that Ms. Hamilton erroneously relied on MANA surveys, which in petitioner's view did not involve comparable companies or transactions. Although petitioner is not in the manufacturing business, it performed a service similar to a manufacturer's commission agent. Taking into account the materials within respondent's possession at the time of making the Section 6038E3 determination, we are not persuaded that respondent's reliance on the MANA survey was misplaced. Okay. Petitioner argues that what-if scenario shows that Ms. Hamilton backed into the 15% gross profit spread and that her suggestion that a 10% spread would ensure a profit. No? Kasi yung spread nila dito is 6% lang, no? Kaya luging-lugi, nag-claim sila ng net operating loss. Ms. Hamilton did calculate the minimum spread necessary for petitioner to show a profit. The MANA Research Bulletin states, typically, an agent and a manufacturer will offer what they feel is a fair rate for the work to be done when they negotiate their contract. But in general, fair is a figure whereby both parties can make money. No? So, determine nila kasi pinag-uusapan dito yung loss no? ng related parties. So, nung sabi nila dito, fair is a figure whereby both parties can make money and where both are pleased with the arrangement. No? Okay. So the important point to remember is that a commission rate should be determined empirically to ensure that you and your agencies can make money, reap profits. No? So pare-parehong kikita. It was not an abuse of the commissioner's discretion under Section 6038A to assume that a fair gross profit spread is one that would allow petitioner to make an overall profit. Petitioner also argues that Ms. Hamilton erroneously increased the gross profit spread beyond the base adjustment from 10 to 15%. No? So tinaasa naman ni Ms. Hamilton. However, petitioner admits that it performed additional services for Asat Limited Given the latitude mandated by Section 6038A, we cannot say that the Commissioner abused her discretion, no? By increasing the base spread by 5% for the additional services. Kaya sila dinagdagan ni Ms. Hamilton yung kanilang base, no, na profit kasi may additional services sila din na binigay. So even without the MANA survey, Ms. Hamilton and the IRS economist experiences with similar taxpayers support a gross profit spread in the 10 to 15% range, establishing that the IRS determination was not an abuse of discretion. So we hold that petitioner has failed to show a Section 6038A abuse of discretion in respondent's determination. So, in short, tama yung ginagawa ng IRS, no? NOL, net operating loss. No NOL deduction is allowed. So, hindi sila pina-allow, hindi pinapadidak ng net operating loss. Since it was created using a 6% gross profit spread, no? Kasi 6% gross profit spread yung ginamit nila, so net loss sila. Pero kung gamitin mo yung 15%, hindi sila net loss, no? So petitioner admits that a 15% gross profit spread in earlier years would eliminate its NOL deduction. Hindi siya net loss, no? In short. Okay. Consulting fees. Ito namang consulting fees, ito yung fees na dinideduct din ang related party sa kay Asat Limited, no? The deductibility of the consulting fees is not a Section 6038 issue since it does not involve a transaction with a foreign related party. The consulting payments were made by petitioner to Worldtech, a domestic corporation that was not related to petitioner at the time, no? Kasi banda huli na lang siya binili ng Worldtech, no? The parties presented evidence on the consulting fee issue and argued it on a brief. Therefore, we shall decide the issue. See Rule 41B. Deductions are a matter of legislative grace. Petitioner has the burden of showing that it is entitled to any deductions claimed. Parang itemized deductions din, no, na nagkiklaim na tayo dito sa Pilipinas. It is the burden of proof in claiming deductions is with the taxpayer. Rule 142A, New Colonial Tech Ice Company versus Helverina, no? To be entitled to business expense deduction for consulting fees under Section 162, petitioner must prove that the expenses were ordinary and necessary, paid or incurred in carrying a trade or business, incurred during the taxable year in which the taxpayer seeks to deduct them, and paid by the person to whom the services were rendered. No? So ito yung apat na requirement para ma-claim mo yung consulting fees, no? So ano yun? Must be ordinary and necessary. It must be paid or incurred in carrying on trade or business, incurred during the taxable year in which the taxpayer seeks to deduct them, and paid by the person to whom the services were rendered, no? So respondent argues that the consulting expenses were the expenses of Asat Limited, no? Or QPL, and thus not deductible by petitioner. So we need not decide the issue on that ground, as petitioner has failed to show that the consulting fee expense was ordinary and necessary, no? So doon pa lang sa una na requirement, number 1, it must be ordinary and necessary yung consulting fee, bagsak na, no? Commissioner versus Henninger. To be necessary, yan ang ano dito To be necessary within the meaning of Section 162, an expense need be appropriate and helpful to the taxpayer's business, no? The requirement that an expense be ordinary connotes that the transaction which gives rise to it must be of common or frequent occurrence in the type of business involved, no? Okay. We question whether the consulting fees were determined on an arm's length basis. Mr. Lee and Mr. Chappell were friends. Worldtech, a corporation owned 50% by Mr. Chappell, eventually acquired 95% of Petitioner. QPL, a corporation whose majority shareholder was Mr. Lee, later acquired Worldtech. There is no evidence in the record of how the consulting fees were determined. So, wala, hindi recorded. Yun yung sinasabi natin na kulang sa documentation. So, anong pinaka-importante talaga if may mga dispute? Documentation. No? So, anong sabi dito ng court? There is no evidence in the record. So, walang documentation. No? There is no evidence in the record of how the consulting fees were determined. The monthly amounts, which were unusually billed on the 10th of each month, were for the half-time services of Mr. Combs and the services of Mr. Smith. So ito, na-determine nila kung saan galing yung consulting fees, no? Kung sino nagbibigay. The monthly fees range from 31,000 for just Mr. Smith to 124,932. So 69,632 plus 55,300. These relatively large amounts, no? Kasi dalawa lang yung nagbibigay ng consulting fees. Dalawa katao. These relatively large amounts given the size of Petitioner's business. Liit lang ng business niya, no? Very simple functions. And yet, ganun kalaki ang consulting fees. Were promptly paid, even though there was no written contract between Petitioner and Worldtech, and the invoices themselves provided almost no detail. No? Kulang talaga ang documentation, no? So there is no evidence in the record of the skills Mr. Combs and Mr. Smith may have possessed to warrant such consulting fees. Kasi ang mahal, so dapat napakagaling mo. At saka yung consulting fees na yun, dapat high-tech din ang business ng binigyan ng consulting fees, no? In this case, Asat Inc. There is no evidence in the record of the skills Mr. Combs and Mr. Smith may have possessed to warrant such consulting fees. We hold that Petitioner has failed to prove that the consulting fees were ordinary and necessary business expenses. So, kulang ng documentation. Hindi nila na-prove na necessary and ordinary business expenses ang consulting fees. Yun yung dinisallow ng IRS. Section 6662, accuracy-related penalty. Ano yung accuracy-related penalty? Yung you underpay the tax required to be paid in your tax return. Section 662A imposes a penalty in an amount equal to 20% of the portion of the underpayment of tax attributable to one or more of the items set forth in Section 662B, including negligence or disregard of rules or regulations. So, respondent asserts that the entire underpayment of petitioner's tax was due to negligence or intentional disregard of rules or regulations. Yun yung sabi ng IRS. Section 662B1, and under the predecessor section covering the addition to tax for negligence, Section 6653A, petitioner bears the burden of proof on the penalty in issue. Rule 142A, negligence includes any failure to make a reasonable attempt to comply with the provisions of the Internal Revenue laws. No? So, negligence yan kasi walang reasonable attempt, no, to comply with the revenue laws. No? Section 662C, income tax regulations. Negligence is the failure to exercise due care or the failure to do what a reasonable and prudent person would do under the circumstances. Yun po yung negligence. No? Disregard include any careless, reckless, or intentional disregard. Dito, pag sa batas na talaga, dinidefine, no? Very important yung meaning ng bawat words. Dinidefine bawat words, no? Disregard includes any careless, reckless, or intentional disregard of rules or regulations. The accuracy-related penalties of Section 6662 do not apply with respect to any portion of an underpayment if it is shown that there was a reasonable cause for such portion and that the taxpayer acted in good faith with respect to such portion. Section 666 4C1. The determination of whether a taxpayer acted with reasonable cause and in good faith depends upon the pertinent facts and circumstances. Ibig sabihin, wala siyang negligence. Hindi siya negligent. No? Income tax regulations. The most important factor is the extent of the taxpayer's effort to assess his or her proper tax liability. Siyempre, mag-e-effort siya. Reliance on a return preparer, however, may relieve a taxpayer from the addition to tax for negligence where the taxpayer's reliance is reasonable. No? Yun yung pag tinignan ninyo yung case ni Judy Ann Santos, no? Although meron siya mga under declaration, hindi siya na charge ng fraud kasi nag-rely siya doon sa tax preparer niya, which is at the time namatay na, no? So wala siyang criminal liability, pero may civil liability siya, pinabayaran sa kanya yung deficiency. A taxpayer, however, is not relieved from liability for the addition to tax for negligence merely by shifting the responsibility to a tax professional. Kaya kawawa ang mga tax professional, ha? Pagdating na sa kasalanan ng taxpayer, isi-shift sa tax professional na siya may mali. Reliance on an expert is not an absolute defense but is a factor to be considered. A taxpayer's reliance must be in good faith and demonstrably reasonable. In such a case, a taxpayer will be entitled to rely upon an expert's advice even if the advice should prove to be erroneous. Kaya nag-a-accredit ang BIR ng tax agent, no? Accredited tax agent. Okay. The ultimate responsibility for a correct return lies with the taxpayer who must furnish the necessary information to the agent who prepared the return. In other words, reliance upon expert advice will not exculpate a taxpayer who supplies the return preparer with incomplete or inaccurate information. Sometimes kasi ginagawa na lang din dahilan, no, ng taxpayer yung kanyang tax agent. Pero, in such case, kung nagkamali mo yung tax agent, liable pa rin ang taxpayer. So in this decision, except for the consulting fee issue among the rules or regulations to be considered for applying the negligence penalty are Section 6038A and the accompanying regulations. Respondent argues that petitioner did not keep the records required by Section 6038A and did not provide an authorization of agent when repeatedly asked to do so by respondent. May demand, no, to provide authorization pero hindi talaga nagbigay. Respondent argues that petitioner ignored the requirements of Section 6038A by not keeping records from which respondent could determine the correct tax treatment of transactions between petitioner and Asat Limited. Yan na yung documentation requirements ng transfer pricing na before pa or during the year, pinapagawa na ng analysis, ng documentation, so that pagdating ng transfer pricing audit, nandun na ready na yung documentation. No? Citing Section 16038A 3A1, Income Tax Regulations, respondent points out that petitioner's 1990 tax return preparer, no, a CPA from Deloitte and Touch, informed petitioner in writing that it noted concern in the level of documentation yan and in intercompany pricing. Yan na yung sinasabi ko na pag gumagawa na tayo ng transfer pricing analysis, you notify, no? You notify the taxpayer. Respondent further argues that petitioner has not introduced any evidence that it has reasonable cause for failure to comply with Section 6038A. Petitioner argues that the evidence adduced at bar demonstrates that petitioner was not negligent. Yan yung argument. Petitioner charged a 6% commission rate to Asat Limited. The average commission rate is 5%. Under all the circumstances of industry competition and individual customer order specification, there is a substantial economic justification for the rate used by the petitioner and reported on its income tax return. No? Petitioner further argues that its CPA used boilerplate, language regarding intercompany transaction record-keeping requirements. Finally, petitioner argues that it gave its tax return preparer the information necessary to prepare its return. So, nagbabatuhan na. Unfortunately, for petitioner, the evidence adduced at bar does not demonstrate that the industry average commission rate was 5%. No? Petitioner, wala siguro tong transfer pricing documentation. Petitioner confuses the self-serving, unsupported testimony of its officer with proof. Saying something is so does not make it so. Petitioner had no records whatsoever to document how it determined the value of Asat Limited's services, a requirement made under Section 6038A. Petitioner has not shown that it attempted to comply with the record-keeping requirements of the statute. That's why palagi nating sinasabi talaga yung record-keeping, bookkeeping, recording in your books is the heart of tax compliance. Petitioner cannot escape the penalty by blaming its tax return preparer. Siyempre, alam nyo, pag tax return preparer ka, you are at the mercy of your taxpayer. Kung ano lang ibibigay sa inyo na documents, doon ka lang babase. Petitioner's tax return preparer warned petitioner that the intercompany transaction required documentation. Basta sinabihan mo na sila that this warning was boilerplate, does not make it, hindi pinansin, does not make it any less true. We hold that petitioner has failed to prove that it was not negligent on the Section 6038 issues. Petitioner has offered no evidence that it was not negligent in deducting the consulting fees and does not address the issue in brief. Respondent determination of the applicable penalty must be sustained as petitioner had not met its burden of proof on this issue. To reflect the foregoing, decision will be entered for respondent. So, sinong panalo? The respondent. Sinong respondent dito? The IRS or the Internal Revenue Service. So, balik-balik lang yung paalala natin sa taxpayers na very, very important ang documentation, the record keeping. Why? Kasi it will save you from a lot of trouble, especially if your case already reaches the court. Or, pag mayroon ng transfer pricing audit. Okay, so with that, may question?
Wala na.
Okay. May shout out?
Wala na rin.
Okay. So I would like to say thank you po sa lahat nating mga viewers. And ilan na yung subscribers natin?
1,202.
Okay. So, thank you very much sa ating mga subscribers, Umabot na tayo ng 1,202. And, di namin alam, kasi lockdown po tayo ng hanggang August 20. So, pagka talagang totoong lockdown na to, makikiramdam lang po. So, see you on the, 23, 24, Kasi pansamantala, lockdown tayo, so wala po tayong live streaming. Okay? So, thank you very much and have a nice good night.